Okay. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على ختم الأنبياء وإمام الأصفياء وقدوة الأتقياء سيدنا ونبينا محمد خاتم الأنبياء وعلى آله وأصحابه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. اللهم فقهنا وعلمنا وألهمنا يا رب العالمين. اللهم حققنا بحقائق العلم وزينا بدقائق الحلم يا رب العالمين. فصل فيما يكره للصائم وما لا يكره وما يستحب له. Correct? So the things that are disliked for the fasting person, not disliked, and those that are recommended. قال الإمام الشرنبلالي رحمه الله تعالى: كره للصائم سبعة أشياء. 7 things are disliked for the fasting person. Right? Here Imam al-Tahtawi says that this would appear that these are makruh tahriman. This is غير مسلم. Right? This is not, accepted, really, basically. 7 things are disliked for the fasting person. The first is ذوق شيء لما فيه من تعريض الصوم للفساد ولو نفلا على المذهب. Right? Tasting something is disliked. Right? So the first is tasting something. Of course, tasting without swallowing it. So like you put salt on your tongue, and then you spit it out. لما فيه من تعريض الصوم للفساد, because of making the fast susceptible to invalidation. Right? So this is makruh ولو نفلا على المذهب, even if one does so in a voluntary fast, because a voluntary fast as well has a sanctity. It has a sanctity that because there's ikhtilaf, right? Can you break the nafil fast without excuse?
It would be makruh.
So the governing principle is ash-shuru'u mulzim, right? The beginning something makes it incumbent. But then, so breaking a fast, can you break a nafil fast without excuse? That answer is incorrect, Sidi. Like that's just sort of swinging a big miss, right? Breaking a fast without excuse, right? Nafil fast, and then there's breaking a fast with excuse, which is what the hadith has come, the diyafa, right? So breaking a fast without excuse or breaking a fast with excuse. Then breaking a fast with an excuse, and then the mu'tamad of the madhab is that if it's قبل الضحوة الكبرى or بعد الضحوة الكبرى, right? That's the mu'tamad of the madhab, and we'll see later. Al-Kamal ibn al-Humam chose the other riwayah that يجوز مطلقا بعذر الرواية. That's اختيار في الكمال ibn al-Humam. And there's wus'a in it for people, right? And we'll be coming to that, right? So that's why he mentions وَلَوْ نَفْلًا. Right? And you'll see, because the opinion that is no dislike in tasting something in a nafil fast is because there's that narration, which is not the prevalent mu'tamad, but it was chosen by Al-Kamal ibn al-Humam and has and it opens a door of facilitation for people. Then he says, وَكُرِهَ مَضْغُهُ بِلَا عُذْرٍ. And it's just like to chew something unless there's an excuse. كالمرأة إذا وجدت من يمضغ الطعام لصبيها. Like a woman, like a mother, who finds someone else who can chew the food for her child, right? Like she's fasting, someone isn't fasting, so let's say she has an elderly mother, the elderly grandmother is no longer fasting for something. He said, can you chew the food for the child? Okay. Now you can just put it in a blender or do many other things, right? Um, كمفطرة لحيض, like someone who's not fasting due to hayd. أما إذا لم تجد بدا, but if she doesn't find any other way, فلا بأس بمضغها لصيانة الولد. Then there's nothing wrong with chewing it to guard, the guard the well-being of the child. Let's say they're not eating unchewed food, whatever, right? واختلف فيما إذا خشي الغبن لشيء مأكول يذاق. Can you just open the هدية العلائية? Right? And they differed if one fears being cheated. غبن is being cheated. لشيء مأكول يذاق, for something eaten that which is يذاق, i.e. لا يعرف إلا بالذوق, that you only know by taste. Is this coarse salt or is it sugar? Or is it just some other substance? وللمرأة ذوق الطعام إذا كان وجه زوجها سيء الخلق. A woman can taste the food, of course without swallowing it, taste it, spit it out, if her husband has bad character. Because if he had good character, he would assist her in doing what is good. لتعلم ملوحته, so she may know whether it's salty, and the like of it, right? The like of it. Or the one working in a restaurant or whatever. وإن كان حسن الخلق فلا يحل لها. But if he has good character, so he'll be patient with her. She didn't put enough salt. He said, no worry, we'll just put some extra salt, right? كذا الأمة قلت وكذا الأجير, and likewise the hire, like an employee, right? Right? Right. So Imam al-Tahtawi here, what's going on below the Maraqi? He's arguing that tasting these things, like tasting and chewing and stuff, is makruh tahriman. What does it say in the hadiyah? He doesn't mention tasting. Really? What did he mention? Kuriha what? Madgh. What is the ruling? Really? I have notes in my hadiyah. I may have taken them from the volume 2 here. Okay. So this is an issue of khilaf. Now, in general, methodically, Imam Tahtawi is not min ahl al-tarjih in our madhab, right? His tahqiq is considered, but far below the tahqiq of Ibn Abdin. Like, there's no point of comparison between his tahqiq and the tahqiq of Ibn Abdin, right? Although he's a great alim, etc., but it is, he, many of those before him, of the mutaakhirin, their tahqiq would be given precedence over his, right? Despite his, he's a noted scholar. His hashia is noteworthy and beneficial, etc. But right? Others have said explicitly the following, right? That in terms of, if you apply the maratib al-khawf, right? The maratib al-khawf, then what would happen? That if just putting something in your mouth would be makruh tanzihan. Putting something in your mouth such that, because in general, الخوف عموما يفيد يعني خوف الفساد, there's كراهة تنزيه. And then when there's غلبة الخوف, that's where there be كراهة تحريم, right? Right, right. ف right, right, right. Ibn Abdin discusses this in volume 2, page 112. Right, right. And Maulana, right? Maulana Ibn Abdin doesn't really expand on this issue significantly, right? But he says, كره له ذوق شيء وكذا مضغه بلا عذر. He says here, وكره إلى آخره. الظاهر أن الكراهة في هذه الأشياء تنزيهية. رملي, right? Ramli being Khairuddin Ramli on the Hawashi, on his Hawashi. Of course, he has Hawashi here, would likely be on the Minah, right? So, right, right, and that's aqrab, it being karah. Putting something in your mouth is somewhat disliked. If you put something in your mouth in a way that there will be reasonable fear of endangering the fast, that's when it will be prohibitively disliked. And that's when it'll be prohibitively disliked, right? وكره مضغ العلك. It's disliked to chew plain gum, and this is this plain natural gum. And you can actually buy it online, right? And there, of course, natural gum, which is dried, is of different types. Some even naturally has very little quote unquote juice in it. There's others that are, some are soft, some are hard, and just ask somebody how to use it too. I almost lost a molar. That could have been the cause of a later problem. I just realized, because that molar did break later. I got some ilk, and I just chewed on it, and I almost lost my tooth. So I went to Abu Ahmed, who's Sheikh, later became Sheikh Mu'min's father-in-law. I said, Sayyidi, I almost lost my. He said, did anyone ask you how you make it? Just give dir'ak. I said, no, you have to put it, you have to soak it in water first, and then dry it. Then you do it. Okay. So there's not just one type of natural gum, right? But this is madhul ilk. It's disliked to chew on gum, right? Natural gum. الذي لا يصل منه شيء إلى الجوف مع الريق. Of the kind which nothing mixes with the saliva and gets swallowed. That's why they say العلك الممضوغ, already chewed gum, right? Because most gum has some resin in it, right? Most natural gum has resin in it. So this would be gum in which there's no residual resin in it, such that nothing would enter, right? والعلك هو المستقي, right? And this is just the name for ilk, for gum. وقيل اللبان الذي هو الكندر, right? These are different types of dried resins, right? So there's a number of different types of dried resins. You can look up what these different things are. right? Now it's disliked. Now, of course, if you're chewing gum, old gum, like you're one of those people who keep, like, I'm going to mention someone I know growing up used to keep a bunch of their dried gum on a tissue paper and they would chew it again. Now, let's say you did something like that. I tried doing that. I got a nice slap at the back of my head because I thought it was really cool. Um, but let's say you took some gum that's already been chewed and you rechew it. This is if it's chewed such that it doesn't change the sign that it's not mixing with the saliva. It doesn't change the taste of the saliva. So even then, right? But if there is some taste from it, the default would be this would, once you swallow the saliva, it would break your fast, right? Um, but so chewed gum, right? So you can say al-ilk. This would be al-mamdugh, right? Previously chewed gum. I think that's how Imam al-Haskafi defines it in the Maraqi, right? Um, Now, Tahtawi mentions things that the black gum and this kind of gum and that kind of gum. He's talking about the gum in his times, right? That doesn't have anything to do with us, right? Unless you look for the gum that he used to have, right? Um, um, but why would it be disliked then? لأنه يتهم بالإفطار بمضغه, because one would be um, accused of breaking their fast by chewing it. سواء المرأة والرجل, whether a woman or a man, right? And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what did he say? إياكم ومواضع التهم. Beware of places where you'll be accused. Okay? وقال الإمام علي رضي الله تعالى عنه إياك وما يسبق إلى العقول إنكاره. Beware of doing anything that would cause minds to condemn. وإن كان عندك اعتذاره, even if you have an excuse for it, right? Right? Even if you have an excuse for it. Now, in our times, of course, like every age, like let's say إذا ضاق الأمر اتسع وإذا اتسع ضاق. In our times, it's very easy to reference things, right? So you cannot quote Sayyidina Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu from the Maraqi, right? Right? I mean, you can do whatever you want, right? You could quote the Encyclopedia, like Aqidah from the Encyclopedia Britannica, but you'd be in error, right? So you can't. Like, if you find an interesting quote like this, go look it up. And if you do look it up, this quote is related from the early Muslims. Yunsab li Sayyidina Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Others ascribe it to Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, wa qila ghayr dhalik. Right? But the asl of it are various hadiths of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? Right? The beware. Why? Now, because though sincerity means that you only seek the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but there's the principle of mudara, right? Of acting with discretion, right? 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 So the idea of like mawdi' at-tuham, right? 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 Which also is frequently narrated as a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in that wording again, la asla lahu, right? Right? But it's established as a mawquf hadith, right? And interestingly, sorry, right? Right, in one of the reasons that this other quote is ascribed to Sayyidina Ali is because very similar wording is narrated from Sayyidina Ali Zayn al-Abidin, right? Interestingly. Anyway, that's a right. And the strongest of the hadiths related to this, of course, is the hadith in the Sahihain of Innaha Safiya, right? Right? Where the Prophet ﷺ passed by two men of the Ansar, and when they saw the Prophet ﷺ, they hastened away. فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم على رسلكما. Don't hasten away. إنها صفية بنت حيي. It is Safiya, right? And they said, Subhanallah, Ya Rasulullah. He says, إن الشيطان يجري من الإنسان مجرى الدم وإن خشيت أن يقذف أي الشيطان في قلوبكما شرا. And I feared the shaitan cast an ill thought in your head, right? Another narration, شيئا, right? And anyway, so you can look up this issue of Murtada Zabidi, of course, found a slight basis for the hadith, right? Imam al-Iraqi, of course, in his he did the takhrij of the hadith of the Ihya when relatively young. There's also good work on the takhrij of the Ihya by Imam al-Subki. There's also by Imam al-Zabidi in his Ithaf al-Sad al-Muttaqin. And of the recent scholars, Al-Hafiz al-Tijani, rahimahullah ta'ala, great Egyptian muhaddith, he did an expansive takhrij of the Ihya, which is worth looking at for those who understand a little bit about the science of hadith. It has many fawaid, but he's not necessarily an authority, right? 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 So Zabidi said, أخرج الزبير بكار في المفقيات عن عمر بن الخطاب أنه قال من تعرض للتهمة فلا يلومن من أساء به الظن. That's a very Sayyidina Umar kind of statement. Like whoever من تعرض للتهمة, whoever puts themselves in a position where they'll be accused, then let them not blame those who have ill opinion of them. وأخرج البيهقي في الشعب عن سعيد بن المسيب أنه قال كتب لي بعض إخواني من أصحاب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم معرض نفسه للتهم فلا يلومن إلا نفسه. So Sa'id al-Musayyab, so al-Bayhaqi relates from Sa'id al-Musayyab that some of my brethren of the companions of the Messenger wrote to me, and of course, but the hadith, from if something is only related by Imam al-Bayhaqi, Imam al-Bayhaqi is a great muhaddith, but if it's only in the Shu'ab, it's likely to have some basis, but not necessarily strong in its isnad. But that doesn't confirm the original wording being from the wording of the Prophet ﷺ, but the meaning is confirmed by so many other hadiths, right? Anyways, so that's right. That's why you need to be careful, right? And it's good to be stand corrected. I said, right? So even right, like many people quote this as a hadith, even like people are usually quite cautious, like Imam al-Khadimi quotes about qala sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the Prophet said. But the more rigorous thing is not to ascribe ittaqu mawadi' al-tuham to be the hadith of the Prophet because the ulama of takhrij and likewise, so where does one look in these things? The books of takhrij, and there's some like the takhrij of the Ihya, and there's many works, but at a very basic search, Kashf al-Khafa is Al-Ajluni is a good starting point, but also the Imam Sakhawi, and Imam Sakhawi is who he is. His work on the Hadith mushtahira, right? And Al-Ajluni summarizes, right? And it's also related from Sayyidina Umar that man salaka maslaka dhann ittuhim. Whoever follows the way of people having ill opinion of them will be accused. Will be accused, right? And there, you know, and there's many other such narrations from the Sahaba, the Tabi'een, etc. Right? Anyways, so that's a separate investigation. Right? But similarly, you can't cite these words of Sayyidina Ali like this, right? 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 You do even a simple search, right? Iyaka wama yasbiq. Right? This is not even a research, right? It's just like quick, like 2-second search, right? 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 And you'll find the whole qisas around it. So some of the Hanafis actually quote it. Imam al-Babarti mentions it in the Sharh of the Hidayah, which of course means pretty much nothing, right? The fact that hadith commentators quote it also doesn't mean anything much, right? Anyways, so that these kinds of things require confirmation, right? But the Hanafis have a long history of quoting this from Sayyidina Ali. But that doesn't Rawahul Hanafiya, right? And that doesn't really mean a lot, right? Now, what you'll frequently find is that there's some other thing similarly worded from Sayyidina Ali that said pretty much the same thing. The Hanafi say the ma'na is the same, so but of course my copy says that it's related by Al-Munawi said in Fayd al-Qadir that it's related from Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, and they're sorry, I apologize. He's the the editors frequently out to lunch, right? Because Umar, you can حتى لا يقال خانتني عيني. Look at Fayd al-Qadir. Okay, I'll show you guys. Right here. Can you see this? So this is okay.
Yes.
Hold on. Where's Fayd al-Qadir? Okay. Okay, so you can actually. Right. Right. Interesting. So Allahu Alam, right? But there's a lot of laxity in these quoting from the footnotes. So just be aware that you can't rely on these things. Now, methodologically, if you want to quote something from a Sahabi, right, 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 from a Sahabi, right, then go verify, right? Now, at the same time, we're in an age of excess, right, where people just reject everything. That frequently, it's okay. لم يثبت بهذا اللفظ عن سيدنا علي, but you can find, frequently what you find is there's similar words related from Sayyidina Ali, or you can find that point of wahm, right? That it's actually related from so and so, right? So don't dismiss, like we shouldn't just dismiss wisdom that's narrated. Frequently, the hadiths that are mawdu', for example, have a lot of wisdom, and we just do. It's actually related from so and so, and mentioning what's an asl, what it's based in, because there's this distinction between identifying the relative strength of the hadith and so on, ascribing things to who actually is established to have said it, but also identifying one of the reasons the ulama narrated many of these things is also that insofar as the meaning, it's mustanad from the Quran, from the Sunnah, is wadih. Particularly the fuqaha, whose concern is the transmission of meaning rather than words. But you can't cite 10 fiqh books for one hadith. And you can't cite the hadith commentaries because they're not kutub al-riwayah. Okay. Anyways, so we avoid these situations of um, um, of doubt, right? So someone is chewing gum for some reason. It's better not to do it in public, right? It's better not to do it full stop, right? وفي غير الصوم يستحب للنساء وكره للرجال إلا في الخلوة, right? So chewing gum, they say, is recommended for women. This is not يستحب إن ضرها السواك, right? Right? This is if the siwak itself would be if the use of the toothstick would harm her gums, then to use natural gum would be a good way of keeping her mouth clean. Or if regular use of gum would harm her teeth, then in that case it would be recommended, right? So it's not intrinsically recommended, it's extrinsically recommended. Right? Right? Um, and this is discussed by Ibn Abdeen and a bunch of others. وَكُرِهَ لِلرِّجَالِ, and it's dislike. Using gum is dislike for men, إِلَّا فِي الْخَلْوَةِ, except in private. And this is مبني على العرف. It was considered unmanly. Right? 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 So they says dislike for men. Yani, why? Because it says لكونه مخالفا للمروءة, right? Right? في زمانهم, that it was considered unmanly in their times, right? So where would be undignified, right? You're attending a class and you're sitting there, then that'd be improper because contrary to adab, right? So outside of fasting, it's chewing gum is not makruh. Some of the righteous didn't like chewing gum and stuff because they said that the asl of the seeker is that they busy themselves with remembrance of Allah, and if chewing gum keeps you from zikr of Allah, But that's a matter of دقائق الآداب, subtleties of adab, not من ظاهر الأحكام. That's not from outward ahkam of shara. وقيل يباح لهم, and others said it's permitted for them, right? For men, right? It's permitted, but it's good to avoid. And you can see in Tahtawi an example of the usage of istihbab, not for, because istihbab is a shari hukum, but also ma huwa mahbubun. The word istihbab is sometimes used in the general lexical meaning of istihbab, which is fi'lu ma huwa ahab. Right? Right? Because al-mustahab shar'i, which is that which the lawgiver has deemed to be specifically better. Right? And sometimes the ulama will terminologically distinguish the mustahab, the hasan, the adab, etc. But sometimes they'll use mustahab in the broader usage. It's not terminology, it's usage. Same idea. وكره له القبلة والمباشرة, and kissing is disliked, and um, um, and any kind of sexual contact is disliked. المباشرة الفاحشة, that is major sexual contact, وغيرها, and other than that, or minor sexual contact, just touching with desire, for example. إن لم يأمن فيهما على نفسه الإنزال أو الجماع, if one is not sure that one will be able to hold oneself from ejaculation or intercourse, which would break the fast, right? So the kissing, they say, is of various levels, right? 4, right? Kissing that is permitted without dislike, which is kissing without desire, without fear of invalidation. That's permitted without dislike. Kissing when there is even slight possibility that it could escalate will be somewhat disliked. So kissing that's not with desire, but there's just slight fear that it could go beyond that, would be somewhat disliked, or khilaf al-awla. Right? Then kissing in which there's desire or genuine fear of invalidation will be prohibitively disliked. Kissing that one knows would lead to invalidation, or in which there's exchange of saliva that would get swallowed, is prohibited. Right? So there are degrees of kissing. Now, sexual contact of any type, touching with desire, so touching the opposite, touching one's spouse during Ramadan is permissible, but touching with desire is not. It will be disliked. Touching with strong desire would be haram if one is sure. If you engage in contact like that, it's going to lead to the invalidation of your fast. Then للوسائل حكم الغايات. That means take the rulings of ends. Wallahu a'lam. You can see the taqreer of it in its due places. أو الجماع, or intercourse, right? Which we discussed. في ظاهر الرواية. This is ظاهر الرواية. لما فيه من تعريض الصوم على الفساد بعاقبة الفعل, because of making your fast susceptible to invalidation due to the consequence of your action. Right? وكره التقبيل الفاحش بمضغ شفتها كما في ظاهر الرواية. But it is disliked to have a major kiss, right? A heavy kiss, right? The fahish, fuhsh can refer to that which is vile, but also that which is a major act, right? Right? Which is like a full kiss by biting one, the other's lips, as mentioned in, because that's now that would be, if with desire, etc., that would be in the makruh tahriman kind of category, right? right? وكره له فعل ما ظن أنه يضعفه عن الصوم كالفصد والحجامة والعمل الشاق لما فيه من تعريض الإفساد, and it's disliked to do any action that one thinks could weaken one from fasting, such as getting caught. What is fasd? What's fasd, folks?
It's cutting the vein, letting some blood out. It's called decauterization, I think.
Yeah, so cauterization, right? So it's a type of bloodletting. والحجامة, right? Or cupping. Or heavy work because it is making one's fast susceptible to invalidation, right? Particularly if one does not need to do it, right? 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 So, and that would answer issues related to things like um, you know, exercise or playing sports, etc. Right? One needs to see one's capacity. In our madhab, it's there's no real way to consider, no real ready way to consider an exam, for example, or a job interview to be an excuse from breaking the fast. Right? And when fatwa are given on things like this, right, one of the problems that happen is a lot of people jump into the big issues of the age, but they've not mastered the small issues of ilm. And the title and stuff don't really matter in that. So what you just see, what are they reasoning on the basis of? So I'm Hanafi. Okay, you could be the Queen of England, right? That's not the facts at hand. Like, what is your reasoning? Right? Because the Queen of England gave us an answer according to Hanafi fiqh. We don't take her as an authority, but if her answer is coherent, we'd accept it as being coherent in our madhab, right? But someone has 10 titles behind their name. We may, of course, firstly, titles, like we respect everybody, but especially titles that are given by them or by the people who love them. You don't, we have respect and we say maybe they are, but we don't have to, we approach everybody with respect. You should never even disrespect your enemy, right? Um, right? And one of the ways of, they say, even the shaitan, right? Like, if you look at how one of the ways Arabs would dismiss somebody was to mention him by a name that others wouldn't, why the person wouldn't refer themselves with, right? So, like Imam al-Subki, when he wrote a refutation of somebody, he called السيف الثقيل في الرد على ابن زفيل. And that's Ibn Zafil is not the person's name. And even the expression Zafil sounds like Safil, like lowly. And it's a common way of dismissing someone. But even the shaitan, we refer to him by the name he's known by. Right? That's what his name is. Fir'aun is referred to as Fir'aun. Right? We don't call him the dog of Egypt or whatever. We just refer to him by his name. And that's a type of the basic human dignity that we preserve, even though Fir'aun is who he, he was. Fa, there's all kinds of funny fatwa related to that, right? Um, I'm not that concerned about the answer, but the way, how do we look at that? And don't comment on anybody's answers. The world's a free place, and you want people saying all kinds of things. If you spend your time commenting on what other people do, من اشتغل بما لا يعنيه فاته كثير مما يعنيه. But see, what is the reasoning for a talib ilm? See, what is the reasoning underlying that answer? So we have to be sensitive to people's circumstances. Okay, true. But how does that have to do with this? Because if we're sensitive to people's circumstances, then we say, okay, If someone lives in a village where everybody is Hindu, right? Should we say just stay Hindu then, because it's easier for you? Of course not. Like, like, that's not a قاعدة يبنى عليها حكم, right? Right. Um, and also at a collective, at the level of the ummah, right, it's very important for Muslims to safeguard their right to practice their religion and for that to be respected with wisdom, without over demanding and without under demanding. Over demanding, like, people, like, in a non-Muslim land, is it a reasonable expectation that, you know, say, we want the right to do all kinds of secondary, so that what is reasonable to seek, right? And what does seek? One seeks one's the wajibat and the sha'air, right? But which sha'air are to be sought? And fasting is one of our sha'air, right? So there's exams. It's a reasonable thing to request that exam if there's a significant Muslim population that be held at such and such time, right? Or that people have an exemption if they find it particularly difficult, right? And to lobby for those things. But the reality is that people, Muslim doctors perform surgeries during fasting, etc. The Ummah has been fasting since the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and fasting كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم was legislated for those before us. It's not a new thing, right? In exceptional circumstances, that's a separate matter. Okay. وتسعة أشياء لا تكره للصائم. These are 9 examples, right? وهي وإن علمت بالمفهوم, and these, even if understood by the mafhum, by what is understood from what's before, ساغ ذكرها للدليل, it was proper to mention because of the dalil. What is the dalil? One, because there's hadiths related to these matters, and to give the evidences for why these are not disliked. The first is al-qubla wal-mubashara ma'al amn, is a kiss and to and mubashara here does not refer to, mubashara can refer to sexual contact or simply contact. So here al-mubashara is it's like a lems, right? Right? Is to touch someone of the opposite, touch one's spouse. Because mubashara, bashara is for skin to touch skin, literally, right? Bashara, it can be used for intercourse. It can can be used for contact, right? So kissing or or contact مع الأمن من الإنزال, with no fear of ejaculation, والوقاع, or of ejaculate, not falling into ejaculation, or وقاع, or أي الجماع, or in actual intercourse. لما روي عن السيدة عائشة رضي الله تعالى عنها أنه عليه الصلاة والسلام كان يقبل ويباشر وهو صائم, رواه الشيخان. Because what's related from Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, that the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam would kiss and have contact with his spouses while fasting. And it's related by the Shaykhan, and this is Zahir al-Riwayah. وعن محمد, and it's related from Muhammad ibn al-Hasan, أنه كره الفاحشة, that he did that he considered al-mubashara al-fahisha, active sexual contact, to be disliked. This is, of course, discussing the mubashara ma'al amn, right? There's no fear, right? وهي رواية الحسن على الإمام لأنها لا تخلو عن فتنة, because This is the narration of Al-Hasan from the Imam because this is not free of fitna, right, of being a test, right? وفي الجوهر وقيل إن المباشرة تكره وإن أمن على الصحيح. And in the Jawhara النيرة it says that um, contact is disliked, meaning contact with desire, right? Even if one feels free of the fear of invalidation, right? Even then it's disliked. وهي أن يمس فرجه فرجها, right? Now, one of the reasons this comes up is that it was very common for people to go to sleep unclothed. People would have few clothes, right? And while, people, should, there's a reason why there's pajamas, right? But people would have few clothes, so they would take off their day garments and and hang them to dry and to air and go to sleep under their blankets unclothed. Actually, it's mentioned explicitly by the Shafi'is, certainly. It's there in Hashit al-Sharqawi, in Shafi'i Fiqh, and I'm sure elsewhere, but that's where my friend kept quoting it from, embarrassingly, in Damascus, that it's actually recommended because it's established because from the time of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And that's where the hadiths of separating between children once they're the age of 10, وَفَرِّقُوا بَيْنَهُمْ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ, etc., right? Because, and is it disliked to sleep, with a child of the opposite sex, etc., under the blanket and so on. And they say that's if their awra is not covered, or if there's fear of the improper, right? That also depend on culture and so on, many things. So here, the levels of harm, if they're applied, right, that mere contact without fear, not disliked, when there would be some reasonable fear, there would be dislike in it, when there would be strong reason to be fearful, be makruh tahriman, when one knows if one did this is going to end, the consequence is going to be the invalidation fast, there will be it'd be haram, right? Because that is taking the direct route to invalidation of one's fast. وَدُهْنُ الشَّارِبِ, and to oil one's mustache is not disliked, right? Or دهن الشارب, you can say دهن الشارب, that is the masdar, وبضمها على إقامة اسم العين مقام المصدر, right? دهن refers to the action, the masdar. Duhun refers to the oil itself, but you can use the name of the ayn, the substance, to refer to the act of applying the oil, مقام المصدر, which is ما دل على الفعل دون زمن وقوع, على معنى الفعل دون زمن وقوعه, right? The masdar indicates the action, but not the time of its occurrence. And then Maulana Tahtawi has an objection to it, and that's a separate matter. لأنه ليس فيه شيء ينافي الصوم, because there's nothing in it that goes against the meaning of fasting, even though there's hadiths about oil and so on, right? And they would be understood to refer to caution, that don't get dripping oil that would go in and stuff, but regular oiling does not. والكحل, and applying kuhl is also not disliked at all. لأنه عليه الصلاة والسلام اكتحل وهو صائم, because the Prophet ﷺ used kuhul when he was fasting. Right? And because the eye is not considered a manfadh, a point of entry. والحجامة, right? And cupping is not disliked. التي لا تضعفه عن الصوم, if the cupping would not weaken one from fasting. And one assesses one's temperament, right? Right? والفصد, and likewise cauterizing or drawing blood. وذكر شيخ الإسلام أن شرط الكراهة ضعف يحتاج فيه إلى الفطر. Right? And Shaykh al-Islam Khwahirzada said that the condition of these actions being disliked would be that it weaken you in a manner that would require breaking the fast, while others would say no, even if it makes completing the fast difficult, you have made an act of devotion difficult for yourself. So there's some discussion on it. Right? Now there's a misconception, right? Of course, there's a long-standing. So Tahtawi mentions a whole bunch of things here. There's a long-standing discussion, and you can see the discussion amongst the commentators on the Shama'il, that dyeing one's hair, is it better or not? So what is the asl fi sunnah? وما هو جائز في السنة. So everybody says like, unless you dye with the impermissible, in of itself, dyeing one's hair is established in the sunnah. But then they differed, that dyeing one's hair, right? So what is the asl? To dye or not to dye? Dye, of course, D-Y-E. Right? So there's khilaf. I'm not going to tell you the answer, but just so both are established in the sunnah. There's but what is the asl? The ulama differed. Many held that no, the Prophet ﷺ, it's only individually related that he dyed his hair, but some understood that generally he did not. But then others said, but he didn't need to because he only had few gray hairs, etc. There's ikhtilaf about that. Then, if one does dye, why is one dying? And they looked at the intention. Right? And that's discussed. Right? And of course, though, and Imam al-Bajuri is arguably the greatest summary commentary on the Shama'il, but a lot of students of knowledge are lazy. So it's not the only commentary on the Shama'il, right? It is one. But on issues like this, like, you have on the Shama'il, you need, the least the Talib ilm should have on the Shama'il is al-Bajuri, Jassus, it's very beneficial, Mullah Ali al-Qari, al-Munawi, al-Jamal, right? These are 5 that minimum, right? Bajuri, Jassus, Mullah Ali al-Qari, and al-Munawi, in the old classical editions, they're published together. Sulaiman al-Jamal. And there's so many others, right? Ibn Hajar, al-Haytami. Although Mullah al-Qari fights him on every page, but and there's others. That's just on the Shama'il of Imam Tirmidhi itself. And then there is, of course, there's other great works of Shama'il. One of the most useful is Muntaha Sul ila Shama'il al-Rasul of Maulana al-Lahji, who was the Sheikh of Sheikh Muhammad Ali al-Maliki and the top student of his father, and who taught and Sharh on Wasail al-Wusul ila Shama'il al-Rasul. Now, Wasail al-Wusul of Sheikh al-Nabahani is a great compilation, but it's a compilation, and there, unfortunately, there's editions of Wasail al-Wusul, including the one of Dar al-Minhaj, which are beautiful but tragic. Beautiful but tragic because they don't reference the hadiths in it. And it's tragic because Sheikh Yusuf al-Nabhani, one of the particularly problematic areas in it, it's a great work, beautiful, and there's a lot of wisdom in it. But the section on the 300 hadiths of Jami al-Kalim of the Prophet, he doesn't reference it, Sheikh Yusuf al-Nabhani. And the editors, I guess embarrassed or lazy or just random, don't reference it. So, for example, the hadith that we quoted, that's not established from the Prophet ﷺ, though there are, it returns back to various usul from the Prophet ﷺ, and it's related wordings are related from the Sahaba, but the specific wording is not, is لا يثبت رواية, not from the Prophet ﷺ, nor would it appear with that wording from the companions. Allahu Alam. So they don't reference it, but it's a great work. But the Wasail Wusul Shamail Rasul is, because he's coming so much later, really looks powerfully at these investigations. The Fuqaha, many of these investigations, they kind of just mention in passing, but it has to be taken with discernment. Right? Particularly in the books of adab and so on, like Shir'at al-Islam and so on, sometimes on things that are good to do one takes from, but what is the hukum shari'i of it, you don't take it from the books of adab. Okay. Imam Tahtawi also mentions it's not disliked to dress well in Ramadan, right? And in general, لبس الثياب الجميلة يباح إذا لم يكن يتكبر به. Wearing beautiful dress is permissible unless the person has the intention of being arrogant. So you cannot judge somebody on dressing well. And that's min ma'asi al-qalb, it's from the sins of the heart. Someone dresses really well, to think ill of them for that is a sin. To talk about that would be backbiting. If what you said is true, it would be slander if you say, look, he's so arrogant. Because arrogance is a matter of the heart. Unless, even if you're inspired, you have to act upon the shara. Even if two angels come to you and tell you he is being arrogant, can you act upon that outwardly? No, right? You can't. Right? But he mentions a useful thing that by which to test yourself. You can't test others. وعدم الكبر أن يكون بها كما كان قبلها. A sign of humility that you would be with it, with the beautiful clothing, as you were before it. Right? I remember when my good friend Sheikh Amjad Rashid returned from Tarim, he was told by Sheikh Noor Keller, his spiritual guide, to start wearing a jubba and a turban. Because you'll be teaching people and giving fatwa. Sheikh Amjad said, Sayyidi, could you please excuse me from this for a while? He said, why? He said, and he mentioned several external reasons and some personal reasons. And the Shaykh was very happy. And he said, لكن في حينه. He says, when the time is right, do so. He says, تحت أمركم. He says, as you say. Then the Shaykh commented, that's why he's a blessed faqih. Right? A blessed faqih. Because a blessed faqih should be self-aware as well. Right? Self-aware. That even if instructed, you don't refuse. I'm not going to do it. But with adab, you approach matters with self-awareness as well. You also see the blessedness of being connected with the scholars of guidance. Okay. ولا يكره السواك آخر النهار. And siwak is not disliked, even brushing one's teeth is not disliked even till the end of the day. Brushing one's teeth, siwak, which of course, when the fuqaha use siwak, they're referring to what? Istiyak, right? Is the act of brushing, not the ala. Right? Now, the toothstick itself is not disliked because you're not leaving an external object in your mouth. Brushing one's teeth with toothpaste, however, would have the issue of it's putting something in your mouth. Right? بل هو سنة كأوله. Rather, brushing one's teeth is in itself a sunnah like at the beginning of the day. However, it is recommended to avoid using toothpaste unless there's a need. If you do use it, use a minimal amount. That's what the mashayikh mentioned. And rinse out your mouth once. لقوله صلى الله عليه وسلم من خير خلال الصائم السواك. That from the best of traits of the fasting person is to brush their teeth. Okay? And now Imam al-Shafi'i deemed this to be makruh after the zawal. But should we avoid the difference of opinion here?
No.
Why? Sidi Hamza. Well, you probably should. Right? If you're in a land where people don't do this, then you make muwafaqat al-jama'ah, right? Just keep that in mind. It's like you'll be the one person in Tareem brushing after the Dhuhr, right? Please. Right? Don't let us all down. Okay? Or do it like in your bedroom or something, right? Agreed, Sidi?
Yes.
Jazakumullah ta'ala khairan, Sidi. Not that you would do it, Sidi. I'm just saying, I'm the kind of person who would end up doing something foolish like that. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. But why wouldn't we avoid the difference of opinion of Imam Shafi'i here?
Because one doesn't leave sunnah of one's own madhab to avoid khilaf, walau khilaf al-awla.
Yeah, so one does not, So يستحب الخروج من الخلاف. Avoiding khilaf is recommended إلا إن أدى إلى ارتكاب مكروه مذهبه ولو خلاف أولى. Right? It's recommended to avoid the difference of opinion of other schools as long as it does not lead to doing something makruh or even improper in one's own madhab. Right? And there's a good discussion on why. Right? Why that's the case in our madhab. Right? And then he says, وفي الكفاية كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يستاك أول النهار وآخره وهو صائم. Right? It's in the Kifaya it's mentioned, and the Hadith it's similarly related in Sunan Abi Dawood, etc. That the Prophet ﷺ would brush at the beginning of the day and the end of it while fasting. وفي جامع الصغير للسيوطي, and in جامع الصغير of Imam السيوطي السواك سنة فاستاكوا. Right? Siwak is a sunnah, so brush your teeth. أي وقت شئتم, anytime you wish. Right? And this is, appears only to have been related by a Daylami, and a Daylami is in the books of hadith sciences, like you can look in Manhaj al-Naqd, they mention the kinds of works that are madan al-ahadith al-da'ifa, the kinds of works that if it's only related there, there's a very strong chance that this will be a very weak hadith. But then, of course, a lot of those narrations, you find similar things narrated from the early Muslims, etc., etc., etc. So that is a separate matter, right? ولقوله صلى الله عليه وسلم صلاة بالسواك أفضل من 70 صلاة بلا سواك. And for the words of the Prophet, a single prayer with brushing one's teeth is better than 70 prayers without brushing one's teeth, right? And وهي عامة, and this is general. لوصفها بصفة عامة تصدق بعصر الصائم كما في الفتح. And this hadith is general. صلاة, right? And this تنكير is للتعميم. صلاة, a prayer. Which prayer? Any prayer. She said, so this would, a prayer with siwak, meaning any prayer with siwak, right? So it's لوصف بصفة عامة, right? Right? Would also apply to siwak during Asr time, for example, for the fasting person, as mentioned in the Fath al-Qadir. ولا يكره لو كان رطبا, and the siwak is not disliked if it's moist, but they say it should be moist but not dripping wet. أخضر, even if green. أو مبلولا بالماء, or wet with water. لإطلاق قيمة روينا or ruina, because of the unconditional nature of what we have related. Now, of course, a prayer with siwak would apply to any, in our madhab, to any prayer performed with a wudu in which one brushed one's teeth, as long as one's breath hasn't changed. However, it is cautioned here to avoid the difference of opinion of Imam Shafi'i and to brush before each prayer. That's certainly superior. As Ibn Abdin and others note, it's a sunnah that the Hanafis consistently neglect. So they say that Shafi'is probably brush a little too much, and Hanafis may brush a little too little. Okay. ولا يكره له المضمضة ولا الاستنشاق. Neither rinsing one's mouth nor nose are disliked. وقد فعلهما لغير وضوء, even if done for other than wudu. ولا الاغتسال, and taking a bath is not disliked. ولا التلفف بثوب مبتل, and it's not disliked to wrap oneself in wet clothing or wet cloth. قصد ذلك للتبرد, to cool oneself down. ودفع الحر, and to ward off heat. على المفتى به, according to the fatwa position. وهو قول أبي يوسف, and that's the position of Abu Yusuf. لأن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم صب على رأسه الماء وهو صائم, because the Prophet poured water on his head when he was fasting. من العطش أو من الحر, due to thirst or due to heat. رواه أبو داود. وكان سيدنا ابن عمر رضي الله تعالى عنهما يبل الثوب ويلفه عليه وهو صائم. And Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Umar, may Allah be well pleased him, would wet his clothes and wrap himself in wetted cloth while fasting. Right? لأن بهذه عونا على العبادة, because these facilitate the act of worship. as long as you do it with a sound intention. وَدَفْعًا لِلضَّجَرِ, and to ward off the act of worship being heavy. الطبيعي, and that's naturally be the case. وكرهها أبو حنيفة, but Abu Hanifa deemed this disliked. لما فيه من إظهار الضجر في إقامة العبادة, because of what it manifests of weariness, of expressing weariness in an act of worship, right? And they say that there's no real khilaf between the two opinions, right? Right, because al-ahkam bi'ilaliha, rulings are by their reason, right? So it's not disliked to, for ease and facilitation. It's disliked if you're doing it out of weariness for the fast. Oh, when will this fast end? And and it's not because you want ease and facilitation, but if you do it bid-dajar, right, out of considering the act of worship burdensome, then that's disliked. So the khilaf is suwari, not ma'nawi. It's in form. وَيُسْتَحَبُّ لَهُ ثَلَاثَةُ أَشْيَاء. Three things are recommended for them. السحور, the pre-dawn meal, لقوله صلى الله عليه وسلم تسحروا فإن السحور بركة. Have the sahur because the sahur is barakah. Have sahur because the sahur is blessed. يعني حصول التقوي به وزيادة الثواب, right? Because it strengthens you and there's greater reward, i.e. for following the sunnah. ولا يكثر منه, but one does not eat too much for suhoor unless one needs it for taqawi, for strength or something. لإخلائه عن المراد, because then it goes against the purpose of fasting, which is to experience hunger. كما يفعل المترفهون, as the extravagant do. نسأل الله العافية. ويستحب تأخيره, and it's recommended to delay it. لقوله صلى الله عليه وسلم ثلاث من أخلاق المرسلين, that three things are from the traits of the messengers. تعجيل الإفطار, hastening to break one's fast. وتأخير السحور, and to delay breaking one's fast. وضع اليمين على الشمال في الصلاة, and to place the right on the left in the prayer. Right? This also from the words of Abu Darda, والله أعلم. وتعجيل الفطر في غير يوم غيم, and it's recommended to hasten to break one's fast in other than a cloudy day, i.e. when you're uncertain with reason as to when Maghrib has entered. وفي الغيم يحتاط حفظا للصوم عن الإفساد, and on a cloudy day one is cautious to guard one's fast against breaking. والتعجيل المستحب, and the recommended hastening قبل استفحال النجوم ذكره قاضي خالد, and the hastening that's recommended is before the stars spread. Right? والبركة ذكره قاضي خالد والبركة ولو بالماء, and to attain the blessing even if it just be with water. وقال صلى الله عليه وسلم السحور بركة فلا تدعوه, the pre-dawn meal is blessed, so don't leave it. ولو أن يجرع أحدكم جرعة ماء, even if one of you takes a sip of water. فإن الله وملائكته يصلون على المتسحرين, because Allah and His angels send blessings upon those who have the pre-dawn meal. Because you're doing an ibadah for many reasons. One, because of the strength, embracing mercy, following the sunnah, but also because even this, having that sip of water out of following the sunnah at the time of sahar, you are worshipping Allah in the most blessed of times. Rahu Ahmad. Right? And then he talks about the awarid, the things that affect the fast, will stop there. وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.
Shaykh Faraz, where the author rahimahullah talks about getting hijama done as being makruh if one fears that they may get tired or whatnot. If someone does get hijama done and they feel very sick and they break their fast, would they have to do kafara?
No, because they didn't have the intent to. No, so if they break the fast, they have to make qada, but not kafara. Because they got sick, right? Right, what's the question based on?
Well, someone asked me, so I was wondering.
Should be answering people's fiqh questions, Sidi. People ask, say, I don't know. Simple as that, right? Right. People went to Imam Malik, asked him 40 questions, all but 4 or so. He said, I don't know. So we came all the way from Iraq. What do we tell our people? I said, tell them I don't know. Tell them Malik doesn't know. Right? Right? That's Ibn Maulana, well, not Maulana. Ibn al-Qayyim called his book on the principles of fatwa, إعلام الموقعين, informing those who sign off عن رب العالمين. It's a serious responsibility. So unless one has to do it, and people don't know, tell them to go to ask the people who know. Simple as that. Right? إلا بنقل معتمد, right? Except if there's a reliable. And even if other people do it, people worship the devil, right? Someone tried to release shoes that are, like, devil wear or whatever, like, recently, right? There's a lawsuit going on about it. So does it mean we do it too? Of course not. So likewise, okay. Imam Malik said, لقنوا أصحابكم قول لا أدري. Instruct your companions to say, I don't know. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.